All right, we're going to run this Q&A. Again, I want to welcome to this Q&A. There was a question that came in. I'll see where this goes, but the question was that a person is currently in the process of converting conservative. I've got a number of these questions recently. Still want to have an Orthodox conversion, maybe, whatever the case is. But they're Orthodox leaning. So what do you do? What do you do when you get criticized for being conservative leaning politically and Orthodox leaning in Judaism? So Reform Jews have a hard time with Orthodox leaning people, but not always, especially other Jewish groups, not against Reform, just sometimes disagree with their world viewpoints. Yeah, so that was the question. So first of all, being conservative politically, not a bad thing. I mean, but not everything. Obviously, better than Democrats in many ways, but whatever, they also have their issues. So it's not a question of whether a person's Democrat, or let's say Republican, they got their own issues, as well. So, a Jew is going to vote, they're going to vote for the person who's best, it's going to be best for them, best for Israel. It's, not just, oh, we're going to, only going to vote, only going to vote, you know, conservative, and, and all that. So the question is that, okay, they're Orthodox leaning, not exactly sure what that means. If they're fully Orthodox leaning, they're, whatever it is. So, it could be a lot of different levels there. But Reform Jews have a hard time with Orthodox leaning people. Now, why would that be? Everyone claims, a lot of people claim to be open-minded. We don't claim. No one's ever gonna, accuse me or other people of being open-minded, right? We're definitely not, open-minded, that's for sure. But why do they have a hard time? What's their issue? So to speak, they feel rejected, right? That's their issue. One of their issues. They feel we look down upon them. They feel sometimes people say, I've heard this many times, they'll say, you don't think I'm Jewish. I don't know, if your mother's Jewish, then you're Jewish, right? It's not a problem, right? It's certainly not a, a problem, but could have a, chip on their shoulder because they feel they're being judged. Again, even, and I've seen this many times, even if, you don't say anything. There are people who say, oh, you don't think I'm Jewish. Meaning they're asking or they're stating, we don't think, or I don't think, let's say, whatever it is, that you don't think they're Jewish enough. So there's not a judgment call. Yeah. They don't keep kosher, they don't keep Shabbos, many things they don't do. Okay. So the Torah says that's forbidden. Yeah, God says it's forbidden. And nothing to do with what I think or don't think. Right? So, I told somebody that, maybe the Torah is anti-pig, maybe the Torah is, anti-non-Jew, maybe the Torah is anti like all kinds of things. Okay. But either bottom line, you believe in God, or you don't believe in God. Yeah, God created the world, I have to serve him at whatever level, or I don't. Right? It's sort of like nothing, nothing in between. So they're going to have an issue with conservative Jews also, because they also don't recognize them. Right? They also, I'm not going to say look down upon them per se, but they also they'll be conservative because they don't want to be Orthodox or Reform. Yeah, but there's a major difference, obviously. I don't think Reform and conservative are that much different. Maybe conservative a few years behind Reform. They started off differently. As we mentioned many times, Reform, their whole goal was to uproot Judaism. Conservative, we had a lot of Orthodox rabbis, and they just veered off the path, right? They started keeping Jewish law. But they started out as a movement, the late 1800s to modernize Judaism, for American Jews. That's what their goal was. Reform was different. Their goal was just do whatever they want. not hold by Jewish law. That's it. Their goal was to uproot Judaism. They didn't start with major things, but eventually the whole thing snowballed. So again, I would say personally, I don't think there's that much difference between them. Even conservatives a few years behind, I don't even think that's the case anymore. Right? But they started off very different. But my Rabbi would say it doesn't matter. The fact that someone would identify being as reform is bad. Not only bad, it's wrong. Yeah, and it's worse because the way they started, the way the movement started. But most people today, if they're reform, they'll say, well, I'm not conservative Orthodox. Okay. But deep down, a lot of these people, they don't know anything about the methodology of, what Reform Jews really believe in and how it started. They have no idea. Conservative Jews don't either. Right? They have no idea. They'll just say, I'm not Orthodox, I would never be Reformed. Okay. But, you want to break it down, how much different are Reform and conservative Jews? Yeah, today, practically speaking, in what they do. They're not that much different. Both have gay rabbis, both have transgender, whatever. Both will, count women as part of a quorum. I mean, that'd be the worst thing, so to speak. They both, a lot of them don't keep kosher. Even, on the books for the conservative movement, they should keep kosher, and keep the Sabbath and, and other things. So practically speaking, I don't think there's a big difference, between them. The big difference is how they started, right? Definitely how they started. So Rabbi said anyone who identifies, with reform is out, right? They're a different class. Why are they a different class? They're a different class because that's how they started out. Their ultimate goal was to uproot Torah. Conservative movement didn't start out that way. They might be heretics as well, even though they don't know very much. So both I would put in the same category, observance-wise, some more, some less. I don't think it really matters. But my Rebbe would hold, though. He would hold the difference is how they started. That's the major difference, regardless of where they're holding today, practically. Yeah, so Reform Jews and conservative Jews will have an issue because we don't recognize them, right? We don't recognize, certainly their converts we don't recognize, right? That's for sure. But if they are Jewish, their mother's Jewish, then we have an obligation, try the best of our ability, bring them back, right? That's, that's our goal, try and bring them back, right? Nonetheless, they're going to look at us and say, oh, you don't think we're good enough. Oh, you don't think we're Jewish. If your mother's Jewish, again, if your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish. Okay. But they have a chip on their shoulder because they feel, we look down upon them. Now, it's not a question of looking down upon them. It's not a question of we think we're better. That's not a question of that, right? The issue is what they're doing, right? Going against what God says. That's the problem. Reform and conservative, doesn't matter. Reconstruction is whatever you want. Whatever they're doing, they're going against what the Torah says. But it's not like they know anything. I had somebody that when I was learning Shiva before I left, or was it really after? It was after I left. This religious Zionist, yeshiva became an ultra-Orthodox Jew. So I came back. I was there came back sometime later for, I don't know, there's a bris, circumcision, whatever it was. And I saw this guy that I'd gone to, I'd gone to university with. So I told him he was studying to become a conservative rabbi. So I said, oh, so you came to learn, in yeshiva because that's the only real learning you'll ever do in your life. It's like, I knew you would say something like that. I said, yeah, but I wasn't kidding. Because when you go back, being a conservative rabbi, what really, you're going to learn every day? You're going to learn Gemara every day? You're going to, maybe you will, maybe you won't. But, that's the only real learning he's going to do, pretty much. Yeah. So, yeah. So you say, well, you knocked him down for no reason. Wasn't for no reason. Right? Wasn't for no reason. Put him in his place. Right? Just has to know. Sometimes people just have to hear the truth, even if they don't want to. But it's just ironic because again, where are they coming from? Where in the world are they coming from? Do they believe that, God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai? Now, some people in the conservative movement do. Many of them don't. There's a wide spectrum. Yeah, the Reform movement, I don't know if anybody does. Yeah, part of the doctrine is God did not give the Torah. It was a committee, I don't know, 5 people, 4 authors and a redactor, whatever it was, documentary hypothesis, whatever they think, but God, well, they're going to see God the same way we see it? For sure not, right? For sure not. So I would lump them both together. I don't think there's, that much of a difference between them. Today, so anyway, the last comment was, I'm not necessarily against reform, just sometimes disagree with their viewpoints. I mean, again, any quote unquote movement their goal is to uproot Torah mitzvahs, take God out of the picture, do whatever you want, you're going to argue with it, right? I don't know exactly where they're holding different things, but you're going to make a stand. The Torah says forbidden. You can't say, like Leviticus chapter 18, right? I'm going to get to the end of chapter one day. It talks about homosexuality. You can't say, well, it doesn't apply today. A lot of people doing it. We're going to, we say it's okay. Why do you say it's okay? Torah makes very clear. Torah makes very, very clear, right? There are, more 20 verses in that chapter speak about forbidden relationships. And it mentions it there also. So and one person tell me, well, there's a verse before that talks about idolatry. So really, homosexuality should only be forbidden because of idolatry. What's the connection? So it's good. The question's valid. What's that verse about idolatry doing in more than 20 verses of immorality? Good question. Because it's juxtaposition of the verses. So you have to see what it's doing there. Go to the commentaries, deal with it. But you can't say, if 91% of all the verses in that chapter speak about immorality, you're going to now tell me one verse, you're going to take it out of context and say, and you're going to tell me that one verse is talking about something else when 91% of the whole chapter is talking about, immorality. Kind of hard to say, right? So there are basic things they go against that, things don't apply today, right? Like the conservative movement will say, you got to go according to the times. I don't know. So what? Times change. What if times change? Torah doesn't change, right? Up until 200, 250 years ago, everyone was Orthodox. People went off the rails, right? The Torah didn't change. Nothing changed. Oh, over the last 3,500 years. Nothing's changed. They came up with these new movements either to uproot Torah or to make Torah more, more accessible in the modern world. That's where the movements came from. But again, you have to show me verses inside that say I can pick and choose and do what I want. Just because you don't understand it or it doesn't make sense to you doesn't mean you don't have to keep it. It means we have to learn about it. We have to understand it. You still have to keep it, whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense, right? To us, you still have to learn it. But some people say, why would I ever keep it if I don't really fully understand it? So what's a simple answer? You go on a plane. You understand anything about thermodynamics? Well, maybe some people do. Very good. But most people have no clue about thermodynamics. Yeah, they're not going to go on a plane until they understand thermodynamics. Or get in the car, learn how to drive. They don't know anything about how a car works. How the engine works, which probably most people don't. Or some people do, I'm sure. Probably most people don't. So most people don't. You're ever going to get in the car? But this is a very good excuse, though. Until I really fully understand. Yeah, you'll be here forever. Because you're going to say, well, I don't like this explanation. I don't like that explanation. Right? I'll take Webster's fourth definition. They don't want. They don't want. Because even what makes sense, they're not going to change. But so they're not going to like our viewpoints because we think they're wrong. Right? And if they're Jewish, we still think they're wrong. Okay. Right? But they're going to think, oh, we're fanatical and, this and that. Bottom line, what is being passed down to the next generation successfully? Us. That's it. Got over 90% chance of passing it down the right way. And it's going to stick. These other movements, 60, 70% into marriage, finished. So I tell people, you want to be a fossil, go there. You're going to disappear, just like the Karaites. They're all going to disappear, right? 100% they're going to disappear. That's the way it is. Those are the facts. Those are the facts on the ground. People don't want to hear it. You got to be politically correct. Who says you have to be politically correct? Who says you have to be politically correct? They may not like it or opinionated. Okay. But we believe we have the truth. They ever looked into it? They ever thought about it? You've ever delved into it? They ever learned something really in their lives? Never. Never. It's all, a watered down version of whatever. So our job is try and teach them, try and bring them back. We are going to disagree. Conservative will disagree with reform. Reform will disagree with conservative. Okay. But again, it's not based on issues because they both think the same thing, more or less. I don't think it's like so radically different. It's not so radically different. Just the way they started out is different. Someone asked how to explain to a child sees a transdresser, cross-dresser, transgender in public. Yeah, it's a good question. Very, very good question. Well, if they're old enough to understand that, they're one thing and not the other, so you give a basic answer. Say they think, they're in the wrong body. But, a simple explanation, you can tell them is, God gave everyone, the body that they're in. So they feel, this is what they think also, they feel they're in the wrong body. Okay. Yeah, but you can explain and say, whatever body God gave you, that's the body should be in. We don't have the right, according to God, to change that. Right? Again, how would you give that explanation, to a little kid? Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. It's almost like, you could say, well, maybe it's feeding into them. They're gonna say, well, how do I know I'm in the right body? Right? I don't know if you want to start that conversation. Yeah. But in general, whatever body a person's in, right, it should be pretty obvious that that's the body it should be in. Again, without getting into Kabbalistic, ideas, could a male be, could a female soul be in a male? Could be. I heard someone explain this. I'm not, well versed in Kabbalah to say yes, no, or whatever. Let's say that's true. Okay. But the vast majority of people, just in general, the vast majority of them wish they were normal. Gays, transgenders, across the board, they wish they were normal. Yeah, it's like a totally abnormal thing to see people parading doing this stuff. And just, and like bragging about what they do. Imagine if all the pedophiles started having parades. All the philanderers, all the people that committed adultery, all thieves. I don't know, whatever. Started making parades and going around and whatever, bragging about what they do. It's insane. Right? It's totally insane. You have to say that, that they have problems. They think they're in the wrong body. Right? And essentially, you have to say whatever body God gave us, that's the body we should be in. But it's been shown, I think it's been, proven also that these people have mental health issues across the board. I don't think it's like, like totally normal, whatever, but like, literature I've seen and things I've heard, there's an issue there. There's some sort of mental health issue. Yeah. So, depending on the age, maybe you could say they're absolutely crazy, which, it also depends how far they go. But yeah, you can explain the Torah says that's forbidden, by the way. Yeah, cross-dressing is forbidden. Torah makes clear a man can't wear women's clothing, women can't wear men's clothing. There are other ramifications of that, right? Which we've spoken about. Many ramifications. Can a guy wear an earring? Women wear earrings. Men don't wear earrings normally. Yeah, it's a women's thing. Can a guy, stand in front of a mirror for 20 minutes, half an hour, trying to make himself look good? There are issues. Not just the clothing itself. It's things that women do, men shouldn't do. Can men pluck their eyebrows? That's what women do. Now, what about a person that has a unibrow? Doesn't like it. Okay, that he can shave. Yeah, certainly cosmetically he can do that. Especially, if he's dating. There's no question. No question that can be done. Yeah. Get a guy get, body piercing. Also forbidden. Even in different place for a woman. A woman get an earring, not a problem. Right? I don't think they should be so big, and off the ear because it draws attention. But I'm saying other body piercing, Knew a guy got a tongue ring. He told me, says, Rabbi, I don't understand. I first got it, forget the pain doing it. Yeah, I drank something hot, something cold that really stung. I'm like, you deserve it. Said you do something like that. That is desecration of the body, right? No question. And wherever else you do it. Now there is a question about women getting multiple piercings in their ears. But really, technically, it's probably nothing wrong with it, because most people don't do it, right? But there are women that want to have more than one earring. Also, so the Torah makes clear cross-dressing forbidden, no question, right? Men are men, women are women, shouldn't cross boundaries, should not cross boundaries, right? I mean that's just that's clear, but there are other ramifications, 100%. There are other ramifications, not just of dressing differently, right? Again, body piercing is an issue. Person looks in the mirror, could be an issue. Doing anything that women do. Wearing rings. The whole question: can a guy wear a ring? Is married? Can he wear a wedding ring? So in the modern Orthodox community, men wear rings, right? Not everybody, but there are plenty that do. They have like a double ring ceremony when they get married, right? He gives the ring, and then under the chuppah, she gives him the ring. She gives him a ring. Okay. But again, the ultra Orthodox community. So you say, we don't wear rings. So you can say, but back in the day, men also wore rings. You can argue that. Could argue that. But again, it's too much like, it's still too much, like what women do. But depending on the age, of the kid, you have to tell them this isn't normal and that like they have issues. You try and explain it, depending on the age, the age of the child. But like, or let's say, you see Jews that desecrate Shabbos, right? So a person walking by, the Jews, mowing their lawn or whatever. I explain that to one of your kids. Right? Say it's chaval, they don't have Shabbos. They don't understand Shabbos. Yeah, they're missing so much. Wish them a good Shabbos also. While just walk by. Wish them good Shabbos. But in general, we have to explain to our kids to the best of our ability, and show them that what's in the outside world doesn't matter, shouldn't matter, right? But again, there are things that are they're fun to watch that may be innocent. People like to watch cat videos and animal videos and whatever. You're gonna say, so what's the worst thing? What's the worst thing? You say, okay, it's a waste of time. You can say it's a waste of time. More than that, if there's nothing else going on, person addicted to a screen, that's a whole nother discussion, a whole nother topic, right? But here, you have you have to say it's so sad. And so I think this would be the easiest way to say that, it's just so sad someone thinks they're in the wrong body. Like they're saying that God made a mistake. I do know one case, probably more than this, but I had contact with someone a while ago, and both basically when they were born, they had both genitalia, right? Which the mission of the Gemara talk about, right? So, but you can't go around like that, for so long. So the parents made a decision. Parents made a decision, cut off one of them. They had to cut off one of them, right? But the person felt they made the wrong decision. They were a kid. They were, very young. They didn't have a say in it, and they felt they've always been in the wrong body. They're always in the wrong body, right? So the question is, what are they considered? Now they changed. They went back. They went back, but they themselves felt they're in the wrong body. I can't say what someone feels, or doesn't feel, right? The only thing I can say is experts out there say, and I'm by no means an expert, but there are many experts out there saying it's a mental health issue. It's a serious mental health issue. Doesn't mean it can't be helped, right? But it's so you have to explain to your kid that it's sad they're not happy in the body God gave them, right? That might be a good way. I think even a little kid could, potentially understand that. They think, you got to talk in God's terms and in the Torah's terms, and explain that they think they've been put in the wrong body, and that God made a mistake. That'll make them think. What do you mean? They know better than God? God created you a certain way. What, you made a mistake? God made a mistake? I have two brothers over 6 feet. My father's like 5'11", over 6 feet. I didn't get those genes. I was only 5'7", on a good day. If I would have been over 6 feet, I was a good ball player in basketball. Who knows what I could have been? But I didn't get those, and I didn't have a vertical leap either. So, like, okay, I feel like I might have got chipped, but that's the way it's created. That was it. Those are the genes you got. So we're gonna say you gave me the wrong ones. You gave me the wrong this, the wrong that. That's like saying God made a mistake. God doesn't make mistakes. A lot of things about God we don't understand, but he doesn't make mistakes. 100% he doesn't make mistakes. He put you in the right body, put you in the right family. You may think not that way, but we don't have a choice. So all these things are helping us to grow one way or the other. But God doesn't make mistakes. Yeah. So from their perspective, they'll say I can do what I want. It's my body, right? It's my body. Okay. But the problem is, what are they saying in Torah terms? You can explain to them that they are saying that God made a mistake. That they think there's something else when they're not. I mean, you got crazy cases. It's happened in California. It could happen in other places also. Probably California is a good example of this. A kid comes to school, he identifies as a cat. Got his litter box, the whole thing. Very crazy story. Crazy story. So let him identify as a cat. He started to like to purr to, get close to like one of the kids. The kid smacked him. And that kid got suspended. It's like, you can't even make this stuff up. I mean, it's crazy. Identify as a cat. Yeah. Is cross-dressing better? Than like that or whatever. Yeah. Somebody asks, weren't high heels started by male European aristocrats? Don't know. That I don't know. But I will tell you in the States, until the early 60s, men wore hats. You know why that stopped? Because JFK took off his hat. From my alma mater in Boston, he took off his hat. Then everyone started taking off their hats. That started that trend. But you go to the ponies in different, maybe different countries, and especially in England, they wear ascots or whatever. Okay, certain thing I guess for horse racing or whatever, right? But because how things started doesn't necessarily trickle down to what we do per se, because there's an argument. There's an argument. Women want to have a nose ring. Some women like to have a nose ring. Okay. I told someone once, I said, before you go to the mikveh, make sure you take out the nose ring. So they'll say, Rivka Menu. Rivka had a nose ring. What's the problem? What's the problem? So again, in the outdoor Orthodox community, even if that's the case, and she wore a nose ring throughout the centuries, that's not common. Wasn't so common. Maybe in some places, maybe a little more common, whatever. Not common, right? Not common. And it should be done, right? We want to be uniform. We don't want to stick out somebody. We don't want to, we don't want to do things like the non-Jews do, as well. But again, there's a fine line here. Now, again, even if that would be true, and I would agree, that high heels were started by European aristocrats. That doesn't mean it's a good thing. It doesn't mean men should wear them. It doesn't mean that. It's because they started it, right? That doesn't, doesn't mean that, they should exemplify it because it was done. Right? Again, there are crazy things in society that we don't have anything to do with. And we shouldn't have anything to do with. Right? Because of what society represents. Right? And what's there. Right? I don't think I don't think I don't think there's any question. But at the same time, I would say, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of stress on, on trying to keep to the best of our ability. Customs are our forefather. Yeah. Um, there's what to be said for that, right? There's what to be said for that, and we want to be insular as well. We don't be like everybody else. We don't want to be like everybody else. In the modern Orthodox community, by the way, there is a problem with this. Not necessarily transgender. With gays, it's a problem. It's a problem. So we can say, the other Orthodox can say what we want. Their claim is, but we have to deal with it. But we have to deal with it. Now you can't condone it. See, that's a problem also. We cannot condone this. And we cannot say it's okay. Now, if you work with people like this, they get married, you can't put money in for a gift for them. You can't go to the wedding. Try and explain nicely, whatever. But these are things you cannot condone. And people said, you can't say anything against them and you get fired and this. Okay. So a person has to be very careful. Okay. But at the same time, you can't say it's okay. It's ironic because, the separation of church and state. So why can't I come out and condemn it? It's free speech, right? How free is really free speech? Good question. How far do you take that? It's only in the context, right? Come on. If you're a Bible thumper, you believe in the Torah, you believe in the Bible, then it's forbidden, right? No offense. You're not condemning the person. You're condemning what they do. Now, why can you get in trouble for that? To me, it's a mind-boggling thing. What happened to free speech? Someone told me it's out the window. It's absolutely out the window. Someone who's a seamstress. Guy comes in, wants to wear a wedding dress, wants it fixed. Can you do that? Can you fix the wedding dress? It's a problem. This is a problem. There's someone else, what do you call it? A florist. Guy comes in, we want, this bouquet and all these things for, me and my spouse, him, both of us. You can get sued for discrimination. Yeah, it's a crazy thing. I have to sell to you. Why do I have to sell to you? So you go somewhere. I know a story of someone that I guess someone else. I know of a story that I think was a seamstress, or they took it somewhere else. Whatever it may be. And I think it was a guy, in a dress, hadn't totally transformed or whatever. And they're like, I'm not dealing with you. Go somewhere else. Take your business somewhere else. I will not do this. Some people have morals. They should have morals. But they can turn around and say, you have to serve me. Right? Get into legal issue. The Torah says, who says I have to? Who says these are issues. It's unfortunate these are real issues. But they're real issues. So, convincing people of things, they'll call it education, but it's really seriously messed up thing. Kids that young, either they're 8 or 9, doesn't matter. Right? It's funny. So I got so my son soon's gonna be my youngest son, it's gonna be 14. So so I say all the time, I say, come on, you guys don't know anything. He goes, not true. There's a lot of things we know. Come on, even at the age of 14. At the age of 14. Plenty of things they don't know. Plenty of things they don't know. Okay. But you're teaching this to 9-year-olds? 8-year-olds? Someone told me about them like 6, 7-year-olds. My cousin told me, yeah, he said, this girl took it pretty good. I'm like, you don't think it's a problem? I was like, whatever. It's normal today. But if you don't have any morals, you don't have any values, anything goes. That's the problem. That's why anything in secular society can be bad, because it has a negative influence. Now, some people think they're going to reinvent the wheel. They think they know better. And they'll say, no, it's not going to affect me. It's not going to affect. Right? There's the temple has been rebuilt. The Gemara says for the last 2,000 years because of sinas chinam, unlawful hatred. Yeah. So Rav Leff, you should be well. Explain it like this. What does unlawful hatred mean? It means someone less religious than me. I can hang out with them, whatever. I'm just not going to learn from their acts. I'm not going to learn from what they do or what they say. Well, it's not true, but I'm not going to learn from them. Someone who's more religious than me, no, I'm just as Jewish. They're fanatics. You don't have to keep really, to this level of the law. Different things. He goes, that's sinas. In other words, you're hating someone, or you're degrading someone for no reason. I had students once, they were living in a modern Orthodox community, and, before conversion, they were doing certain things, and some people were saying, why are you even doing this? You're not even Jewish yet, which is a Torah prohibition, by the way. If they're actually Jewish, that'd be a Torah prohibition. It's called onus devarim, right? They're making fun of someone, reminding them of their past. But they're holding somewhere where someone else is and says, what do you think? We're not Jewish? We're more Jewish than you. We're born Jewish. Okay. You're not allowed to say that either, but okay. So even if that's the case, why are you degrading them? That's sinas chinam. That is unlawful hatred. You can't you can't tell about truth if someone came back to Judaism, remind them of their past. Say, oh, I remember you used to eat shrimp. I remember you used to do this. That's forbidden. The Torah prohibition. You remind the convert of where they've been and whatever, it's also forbidden. Totally forbidden. So some people would say, this is what Rabbi Leff meant. Some people would say, I can hang out with, let's say, non-religious people, it's not going to affect me. Yeah, it won't affect me. But just on that point, that's totally not true. Because of what they want, they'll say, let's go here, let's do this. Even what they say, and they curse, and they speak Lashon Hara. I can mention a million different things why it's not going to be good to hang out with them. Yeah, but the fact that ultra-Orthodox Jews bother them more, yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. But people want to reinvent the wheel. And people want to say, no, it's not really so bad. I'm above it. It's not going to affect me. It's not true. It's just not true. Because it's very clear, I've been speaking about this for weeks, it's very clear when a person has whatever they see, right? Whatever they see goes into their psyche, goes into their subconscious. Now, you could fight to get rid of it. It's there. It doesn't disappear. It's there. Person's not wired a certain way. It's very hard to get rid of once it's part of you. Okay. But even so, they're going to say, I'm not affected by it. Right? So I saw someone put up a post once. They said, what was the scariest movie you ever saw as a kid? Yeah. Someone said Poltergeist right back in the day. Someone said these Chucky movies. Someone said Friday the 13th. Right? But they remember all these things. Now, these memories come back. But none of these people, I mean, some of them dead already, but none of these things ever happened. It's all make-believe. Probably like, in a bar having a drink right now. Like, it never happened. No, it was so scary. It cut off his head. They did all it's all fake. Right? What are you getting so caught up in the whole thing? Right? But what we see affects us. Affects everybody. For good and for bad. I'm just talking for bad. So these images never go away. Now, they can be buried for a long time. For a very long time. Then all of a sudden, someone, you bring up a memory. Someone says something, oh, you remember this, whatever. And all of a sudden, you're back like 20 years before. Why is that? Why is that? Because that's part of your psyche. So when you see something, right, we say your eyes see, your heart desires. So what that does is whatever a person sees, for better, for worse, is inside of them now. And it's, again, it can be buried for years. Doesn't matter. Right? It's still there. It never goes away fully. A person could, certain commercials from like 20 years ago. Right? If I start singing the jingle, everyone's going to start singing afterwards. They know what it is. Why is that? Because it's there. They remember. They totally remember. Right? So when a person says, oh, I'm not going to learn from their actions, or I can see this or see that, it's not going to affect me. It's not true. I mean, either your soul is dead as a doornail, that could be, right? But to say it's not going to affect me is not true. Because anything we hear affects us. Person I like to listen to the news. All right, plenty of Lashon Hara news, right? Talk radio, sports or the news, whatever it is, all Lashon Hara. All Lashon Hara. Say, well, I won't believe it. I won't believe what they say. Come on, you get these reporters saying, oh, this guy's awful, and he had such a bad game, and he blew it in the clutch, and that's all Lashon Hara, even if it's true. Even if it's true. This guy doesn't come to play, and he's lazy and whatever, and he hasn't given the team anything. Even if it's true, it's Lashon Hara. Right? You take it with a grain of salt. People say, I don't even pay attention to what they think. All right, doesn't matter. But once the person's heard it, they've heard Lashon Hara. Right? That affects the person. Doesn't mean, the next day you're going to go out there saying, terrible things about who knows what, but it has an effect. And the more a person is around it and hears it, it has an effect. 100% it has an effect. So, we think, or some people think, I got it all figured out. I got it all figured out. And because I have it all figured out, this won't affect me, that won't affect me, something else won't affect me. But it does. It does. To keep our head on our shoulders, thinking what the Torah wants from me and what I have an obligation to do and not get distracted, that's enough to keep a person busy their entire life. Because there are so many things, a distraction. So many things, right? And the things don't matter. I have a friend of mine who always say, if there's a war, I'll find out about it. Okay, some things are interesting. People look up things, whatever, okay. But the huge distraction, huge, right? Now again, does that mean it's going to change us overnight? No. But what does the evil inclination do? The evil inclination doesn't say, I want you to do idolatry now. You know you're not going to listen. All he has to do is make a little bit of a hole in the armor. A little bit of a hole, tiny hole. Can wait another few months, weeks, make it a little bit bigger. Then make it a little bit bigger, right? Until eventually the person does what the evil inclination wants it to do. It's not going to be overnight. But if you're not careful, what happens? That's what happens. It's exactly what happens. Yeah. It's a hard thing. Someone here, 1 second. Someone here mentions across the gamuts, Orthodox, Jews, Reform, whatever, everyone's judgmental. Okay. I'm saying it's right. Sometimes we have an obligation to come out against it. I'm not saying all the time. Yeah, social media is nasty. Yeah. That's because everyone thinks they're right. It's another problem. Right? But again, if we're doing it in a constructive way, I wouldn't do it on social media because it's going to be all Lashon Hara, right? In general, it can be nasty, 100%. So I tell people if you're going to post something, just better make sure there's nothing wrong with it, because otherwise you may be guilty of Lashon Hara or causing Lashon Hara, and then you can't, it's almost impossible to get forgiveness for it. And that's like 30 prohibitions in one shot over and over and over again. Right? So yeah. I've been called out on, on certain things from unscrupulous people. Sometimes you got to put people in their place. And non-Jews don't get this either, because they'll say like, rabbis come out against other rabbis. A question comes up a lot. How can they say it's against this rabbi, whatever, right? But if he's heretical, yeah, you got to warn people. Now, would I say you have to warn people every second of every day? Not necessarily. But they have to be warned. That's how Lashon Hara, right? But non-Jews aren't going to get it. They say, oh, you're maligning someone, and look what they said, and this and that. Yeah, someone could come out with like Webster's 8th definition, say something where, other commentaries disagree, and you should never hold such a position. Really shouldn't hold such a position, and certainly not give it over in public. Yeah, it's a problem. But people are totally heretical. Big mitzvah to come out against it. Because it's Lashon Hara. It's not. They have to be condemned. Again, would I say condemn every second of every day? No. But people have to be condemned. There are plenty of people who say things that, First of all, it's Lashon Hara. Second of all, it's just wrong. And I know people out there that they feel it's their mission. It's their only mission in life. When people say things go against Torah, they have to answer. But I always say, God can take care of himself. Doesn't necessarily need someone to call them up. Doesn't need someone to call them up. Right? So I started this whole conversation with someone, wanted to put a comment in my group, and I let it go. Right? I let it go. I put it out there. I answered them first. And I put it in there. But, if you're leaning in different ways, and you're accepting things that shouldn't be accepted, it's a problem. It's not about live and let live. That's another problem. Stupid American idea. Yeah. More morality is relative. It's not. Yeah. The Torah says you have to rebuke your fellow Jew, but you can't do it in a way you're going to embarrass them. Okay. Right? So lo tisav alav chet. So you shouldn't embarrass them. Right? You shouldn't cause a sin by giving them rebuke. But not every second of every day I have to give rebuke. If somebody is not going to listen, there are times where you don't give rebuke. Because then it's going to make it worse. Okay. So that I can hear. But not every case. It's not across the board, you can say that. Or people say, we don't know how to rebuke today. So that gives you that whitewashes everything to say, I can say, I don't have to rebuke. There are times you have to rebuke. There are times you have to come out very strong. A person says, well, is that against the rules? Yeah, it is. God says it's forbidden, death penalty. Next question. They don't want to hear that. Doesn't matter. They want to sit there and make fun and scoff. Sometimes you have to answer. Would I answer? Like someone recently asked me, just for conversation. So what's the next holiday coming up? Now I know and they know, and everyone else around knows. They don't really care. They're just conversation. I could easily say, you're just asking me for conversation. Or you really care about the next holiday. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to offend them. I mean, I'm very good at offending people, but that's all it's going to do. So I said, yeah, Shavuot, it's all about cheesecake. Oh yeah, cheesecake, right? That's it. Right? But sometimes, you got to say things are wrong, period. Right? Even the obligation goes so far that there's opinion that holds that if you rebuke them, and they're about ready to slap you, that's how far it goes. That's how far it goes. That you still have to rebuke. But people make all kinds of excuses. And they'll say, oh, you don't have to because no one's going to listen. Or you don't have to because you don't know how to properly rebuke. In some cases, that's true. Not across the board. I was in a whole bunch of classes, someone's giving 90 classes on this, but going through the proper text. It's not so simple, at all. People just throw out things, but they don't know what's behind it, per se. But you're right. People come out against other people all the time. Sometimes you have to. 100%, sometimes you have to. A lot of times I wouldn't even waste my time. They're not going to listen anyway. How are you going to say it in a way where someone's not going to get offended? You have to see. You have to pick your wars. You have to pick your, you have to pick your thing. You don't always have an obligation to do it. Simplistically, you can say that's what the Torah says, right? See, another to chalk up for what do you call it, for oral law, right? It says you have to rebuke your fellow man. Very good. So at all times, who says all times? The end of the verse says they don't bring upon yourself sin. What does that mean? If you're going to rebuke someone and you're going to embarrass them or cause them to be angry, you shouldn't do it. That's a simple explanation, right? Forget about what the rabbis say. That's a simple explanation. So then I asked this person a whole bunch of questions. Does it apply in this case? Does it apply in that case? Apply in another case? I brought different proofs from different places because the person didn't know. Right? They had no idea. So I explained. I made it very clear. They said, so the person was beside themselves, wow, I wish I had that information. You sit and learn long enough, you get it. You get the information, but it's, it's a grind. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of information, but you can't look at things at face value. You can look at it, try and understand it. What does it apply to? How does it apply? Yeah. You can ask all kinds of questions, then you got to get answers. You just make it up as you go along. That's what you have oral law for. Exactly what you have oral law for. Because otherwise, it's a guessing game. It's a guessing game. Anyone know what a sukkah is? How big it is? Does it have a roof? Does it have leaves? Does it have this? Does it have that? Doesn't tell me. Don't tell me anything. It's a law book. If it would have been, if it would have had all that information to be 1,000,000 pages, no one would ever finish it. You never get close to finishing it. You'd stay on, you'd stay on Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1 forever, right? You never get out of it. You never get out of creation. You never know what to do. But yeah, it's bad in the sense that people all, seem to be always criticizing others. Yeah. Sometimes you have to, though. Sometimes you have to. Problem is in social media, someone's going to get offended, then it's Lashon Hara. Could be Lashon Hara, and then what happens? You finish. Can't repent for that. I see all the time people put up before Yom Kippur, if I offended anyone. How do you know if you offended anyone? You're going to offend millions of people. You have no idea. Very, very dangerous. I always tell people, if you're going to, if you're going to put something up, you're going to put a post up, you make sure it's very clear. And no one's going to say anything either way. And what if someone does? You're into problems. You're into problems. Speaking on absolute because is right. You're right. It's very clear. Chofetz Chaim says, in the laws of Lashon Hara, he says you're allowed to. Not only that, it's a mitzvah to. People say, "Oh, it's not right," and you're blaspheming against this person. No, he deserves it. People have to be warned. Never listen to such a person. That's not Lashon Hara. Totally not Lashon Hara. Yeah. Someone ever says, "Read guard your tongue, read 2 laws a day," right? But you have to. Someone came to Chofetz Chaim and said, "Rabbi, you told me I can't speak." Chofetz Chaim said, "I didn't say that. I'm teaching you how to speak." Right? What about coveting? Someone says feels easy to overlook, lusting after others' coveting. Yeah, you're jealous of what someone else has. So I think I've given 28 classes in Ethics of Our Fathers, right? Chapter 2, Mishnah 16, about an ayin hara, about being jealous, right? I'm not going to go through that now, but yeah, coveting is rooted on gratefulness. It's rooted in jealousy. You want something that someone else has, or you feel that you deserve what someone else has. Why don't I have that? Someone's building an extension to the house because they need the extra room. You can't because either there's no room, there's no place to add, or you don't have money, or whatever the case is. So you feel bad. But the other person's not doing anything wrong, unless he's making it ostentatious. You're not doing anything wrong. Why should you desire? Why should you care what he has? You say, great, he needs the room. He's got all these kids, they only have 2 bedrooms. He's making 2 extra bedrooms. Okay. Beautiful. Yeah. What does that have to do with me? What does that have to do with me? A person has to realize God's giving you everything that you need. Now, we might feel we need more. Yeah. So we should pray God gives us what we need according to Him. Miu Asher Samech B'Chelkoi. Mishnah Perkei Avos says, Ethics for Our Fathers, who's the rich person? Someone who is happy with his lot. Unfortunately, there are people out there not happy with God's given them. So how do you become grateful? First of all, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. Person got the best spouse, best kids. You have no idea what's going on. What's going on there? Could be mental health issues. Could be, marital problems. Could be kids' problems. Could be all kinds of things. A person before they go to sleep should be, look at what they've done during the day. Thankfulness for what they have, how the human body works, how divine providence works, all these different things. That's how you become grateful. You see God, godliness in the world. Just gave this over in what do you call it? In Chofetz Chaim, right? In duties of the heart. The more you know, the more you know and you see God's greatness, the more you're going to sit every day in repentance. That's only by some people. Because you see the awesomeness of what God does and you realize, you haven't lived up to what you're supposed to do. But what do I care what other people do? That's the point. What do I care other people have? Person's got a lot of money, person has less money, whatever it is. What do I care? What do I care what they have? What am I missing? See, that's the problem. Coveting can mean I convince someone to sell something, even if they don't want to sell it, but it's a clean deal. If the person says, I'm so sick of you, trying to get this thing off me, fine, I'll sell it. And he sells it. Torah prohibition of coveting. Even if he did it with a clear contract. He never wanted to sell it, but he did. Right? But he did. Right? It's also coveting. But I'm asking a fundamental question. Why do I care what someone else has? That you have to ask yourself. A person should be grateful for everything they have. But we always want, different things. We always want more. We feel we're not getting enough, whatever it may be on a lot of different sides. So the question is, right? So the question is, why am I ungrateful? One of the worst, it's a serious character flaw. Because no matter what we have, we should be grateful. The rich person has to be grateful for all the goodness and the bounty God's given him. And the poor person has to be grateful for the little that they have. Goes both ways. We're giving praise and thanksgiving up kind of the urge. Yeah. Yeah, but also you got to be careful also sucking up to other people and whatever. Right? But, I think a person should take stock every day and think about the goodness they have. And not look what other people have. When you start looking at what other people have, then you feel you're lacking. Once you feel you're lacking, right, then it becomes jealousy. Once it becomes jealousy, then you get the evil eye. Right? You go to my YouTube channel, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, Pirkei Avos, Mishnah 2, chapter 2, Mishnah 16, given 28 classes, just on the evil eye. Evil eye is about jealousy. Jealousy. Not happy with what you have. So you got to be grateful, even the little that you have, even if you have a little. Or if you have a lot, you got to be very thankful. Someone says, you read Psalm 100 day, Breslov. Okay. But I'm saying there are 1.5 million things to be thankful for. 1.5 million things. But what do? We complain. I want this, I want that, I want the other thing, I deserve this. Why should this person have it? That opens up your file. That's very dangerous. That's very dangerous. Yeah, 99% of the people, Gemara says, die because of it. Because their file gets opened up. You want to say it's not fair and it shouldn't happen and why? Good. Go watch all my videos there. Spoke about it in depth. Yeah, any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, you can find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, ethics for our fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, Rabbi Chaim Kaufman at gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIM, COFFMAN at gmail.com.